All right, everyone, let's talk about starter rares in Raid Shadow Legends, what is going to make them good or what is going to make them bad, kind of just go over their skills and abilities, and I guess you could say also rank them in order from worst to best, and also talk about, in my opinion, why one of these 4 starter rares is going to be the best one by quite a bit. They are all good, though. That's something really interesting. Even though they are starter champions, you are actually going to get the choice to pick one of these 4 rare champions when you do start Raid Shadow Legends. They are actually pretty good in comparison to a lot of the other rare champions in the game. I actually have almost every rare in the champion in the game at this point. And overall, in comparison to a lot of the other rares, most of the starters are actually pretty good, and some of them are insanely good compared to the other rares and definitely stack up to the quality among some epics. So with that being said, let's start off and let's talk about who is, in my opinion, going to be the worst of the 4 starter rares. Now, of course, this is my list. I'm going to explain the reasoning why I'm going to talk about their skills, but if you do disagree, that's totally fine. If you do, feel free to let me know in the comments anything that maybe I overlooked or something that you think makes one of them better than the other that is going to be different from my list. But we're going to start off with the worst, and in my opinion, that is going to be Gaelic. I find this a little bit ironic because Gaelic is going to be the champion that Raid Shadow Legends has in a bunch of the adverts for the game. If you've seen a Raid Shadow Legends ad, they're all over YouTube, by the way, so there's a good chance that you have. Or if you've watched a sponsored video from another YouTuber, Gaelic is going to show up in a lot of them. And he is a starter rare, but he is going to be, in my opinion, out of the 4, he's going to be the worst one. Now let's go over his skills. First one is pretty basic. This is going to be his A1, his auto attack skill. Attacks one enemy 2 times. Damage is going to be based on attack. Also important to note, he is an attack champion. Very basic, not a bad skill or anything, but it's just a very, it doesn't really bring too much to the table besides being an attack skill. Second skill is going to be Hellraiser, attacks all enemies, places a 30% increased speed buff on this champion for 2 turns, and if you do ascend it, it also has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit. So let's talk about the skill for a second. Now, unfortunately, I talked about this in a few other videos, but skills that kind of had that critical hit ability has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit. Unfortunately, this part of an ability is going to conflict with a lot of the ways that you overall build champions. Now, the reason is because you can only have 100% crit, and what you can really do to build around that part of the skill is you would have to build a champion to have less than 100% crit so you can actually benefit from this. So for example, if I wanted to benefit from that part of the skill, I would have to cap my Gaelic's crit chance to 85%. Which means that overall it's going to take away power from the other skills. So it kind of goes against the overall way of how you build a champion. If you already have 100% crit, it's going to do more damage for the other skills, but then you don't get as much of a benefit from that part of an ability. So this is why you have to be a little bit careful when it comes to skills that give benefits to your crit, is because it just kind of goes against the overall narrative of what you're going to be doing to build a champion anyway. So not a terrible skill, though. It is attacks all enemies, so this is going to be your AoE skill. It is on a 3-turn cooldown. It does not get a turn reduction from skill booking it, just going to be extra damage. And places a 30% increased speed buff, but it's only going to be on this champion. So it's not going to be on your entire team. That would obviously be very, very powerful, but still, nonetheless, not a terrible AoE skill. This is something you're going to probably see quite a bit of in Arena if you face Gaelic. It looks really cool, I'm not going to lie. And you could still definitely build a very strong Gaelic, and this skill will hit pretty hard. But when we take a look at some of the other starter rares and the abilities that they bring to the table, you'll see that overall, Gaelic skills are going to be a little bit weaker in comparison to some of the other starter rares. Now we move into the third skill. Attacks 4 times at random, has a 30% chance of placing a 30% decreased debuff for 2 turns, has a 30% chance of placing a 60% decreased debuff for 2 turns if the target has more than 2 debuffs. So this is on a 5-turn cooldown, which is pretty long, and once again, unfortunately, skill books are not going to lower the cooldown of this skill. Now, the problem with this skill is you can see there's a lot of percentages. Has a this percent chance for that percent, this percent for that percent, if this. There's a lot of conditionals. And generally speaking, when it comes to skills in Raid Shadow Legends, the more conditionals there are, the more situational that skill becomes. You need a lot of things in order to happen, in order to fully actually benefit from the skill. And one of those, of course, is a lot of RNG. So as a 30% chance, well, 70% of the time, that's not going to accomplish much. Of course, you can increase a little bit with skill books, but still a pretty low chance. 30% decreased debuff is also going to be the weaker defense debuff, you can actually go up to 60%. And as you can see, this ability does go up to 60%, but the conditional for that is there has to be 2 or more debuffs. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in order for you to get the full benefit from this skill. And with the 5-turn cooldown, it's not a bad skill, but there's just, you're going to see that as we move into some of the other starter rares, the skills that they have are going to bring more to the table. He does have a HP aura for allies in all battles by 15%. Definitely not going to be as strong as some of the other auras, but it is still an aura. So overall, this is Gaelic, and once again, he's not bad or anything. You can still build a really good Gaelic, and compared to a lot of the other rares in the game, he's definitely going to be better than, I would say, most rares in Raid Shadow Legends. But when you compare him to the strength of the other 3 starter rares, in my book, he is going to be the weakest out of the 4. So now we are going to move on to number 2, and that is going to be Lihe. Lihe is going to be a step above Gaelic, in my opinion, and you'll see that her skills overall offer a little bit and bring a bit more to the table. So let's start off with the A1. Attacks one enemy, places an extra hit if this attack is critical. Now, at first glance, that doesn't really seem like it's too great. It's only attacks once, and you have to crit in order to get an extra attack. But once again, the narrative of a champion when it comes to gearing up, having a really, really high crit chance, as close to 100% as you possibly can. In a lot of cases, as you get to the mid and late game, your champions will have 100% crit rate. It just kind of depends how you end up getting that, whether you get it from set bonuses, whether you get it from substats or other methods. But if you build a champion properly, when they do have a conditional that requires a critical hit, you should eventually be able to gear up to pretty much always have that happen. So even though it says attacks one enemy, because it is the requirement for the extra hit is a critical, you're probably going to get 2 hits most of the time with this champion if geared properly. So not a bad skill. Second one is going to be Lightning Arrow. Attacks one enemy, then all enemies. Places a 30% increased critical rate buff on this champion for 3 turns if the target is killed. And then the Ascended skill is going to also have an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit. Now this skill is good, but unfortunately I think there are certain parts of it that kind of work against each other, and they're going to work against the overall narrative of gearing champions. Once again, very similar to the Gaelic skill. His second skill with the 15% increased chance of a critical hit. You know, when you have skills that do that, what it's going to mean is that if you do have 100% critical rate already on that champion, you are not going to benefit from that portion of the skill. And if you have below that, let's say I only had 85% critical chance, well then yes, I will benefit from this part of the skill, which you can get down to a 4-turn cooldown. But then whenever I don't have that part of the skill active, there's a chance that I don't crit. And then unfortunately she has another skill that actually depends on critical hitting. So then a decent amount of the time, this skill is also not going to get its second hit. So you can see that if you look at it a little bit closely, you just kind of have parts of the skill working against other skills and overall just going against some of the narrative of how you overall build champions. Same with that critical rate buff. It places a 30% increased critical rate buff on this champion for 3 turns. If a target is killed, that's a conditional, so if you don't kill a target, you're not going to get that benefit. It is going to be for 3 turns, but you can get this down to a 4-turn cooldown, so it's not going to have 100% uptime, even if fully skill booked. And once again, even though that's going to make it a lot easier in order to gear up a champion, because you're going to have to rely on that critical rate buff, if you do choose to do that, that means it's going to work against you in some of the other skills like this one. So these are just some little things to keep in mind. If you are newer to the game, I might be throwing a lot of info when it comes to skills, but if you take a closer look at it and you kind of read things over, you'll understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about when it comes to certain parts of skills kind of working against each other and working against the narrative of gearing up a champion. Then we move on to the third skill, which is going to be the AoE on a 3-turn cooldown as well, which can't be lowered with skill books. It's going to stay at a 3-turn cooldown. Attacks all enemies 2 times. There's your AoE. It does attack twice as well, which might make it a little bit better for things like the clan boss, where you actually want to end up getting more hits in. But overall, just your basic AoE. And you have the aura as well, which is going to be the same as Gaelic's, increases ally HP in all battles by 15%. I'm pretty sure actually all the starter rares have the same aura, so don't have to talk about that anymore. But once again, I would say Lihe is a step above, and the reason why is because you have this skill right here, which I think overall Lihe's skill kit is going to be a bit better than Gaelic's, because you have kind of like 2 AoEs, if that makes sense. You have this ability, which is a single target, and then it's an AoE. But then you also have Valley of Death, which is another AoE. Gaelics, you only have the Hellraiser. And you do have this ability that attacks 4 times at random, but I would say overall, attacking 4 times at random is not quite going to have the same utility as this skill, which attacks 1 enemy and then all enemies. So that, as well as just overall stats, overall potential, when you kind of boil it all down together, in my books anyway, and you are welcome to disagree, but I would say Elhine is 1 step above Gaelic and is going to be the 3rd worst champion out of the starter rares. All right, everybody. Now let's move on to number 2, second place, and that is going to be Athel. Now, Athel is, in my opinion, a very good rare, and definitely not a rare that you are going to regret taking to level 60. I don't think you'll actually end up regretting taking any of the starter rares to level 60. Some people say they might regret taking Gaelic to 60, maybe to a small extent Elhine, but I don't think I've really heard anybody say that they regret taking Athel to level 60, especially if you don't really have a lot of epics and you're still kind of newer to the game. Definitely not a bad champion at all to end up taking to 6-star and level 60. She's very strong, very powerful, brings quite a bit to the table. So let's start off with skill number 1. Attacks 1 enemy 3 times. So more hits is going to be better, of course, for those masteries and those Giant Slayer procs. Has a 75% chance of placing a 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns on the last hit. And as you can see, of course, you can boost that up with skill books up to 100% chance. And weaken is a very good debuff, so definitely a debuff that is going to come in very handy. Overall, in Raid Shadow Legends, you are going to want a team. As you move from the early game, this is not going to be as big of a consideration, but as you move from the early game to the mid game and late game, especially in the late game, you're going to want a team that has a very good combination of both buffs and debuffs that kind of all works together. And weaken is definitely a good one. So that's a solid, very, very good skill 1 auto attack. Then we move on to skill 2, attacks all enemies. This is going to be your AoE on a 3-turn cooldown, also important to note, which is a bit shorter than a lot of the other cooldowns in the game. Attacks all enemies, has a 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit. That's going to be the portion of the skill that comes from Ascension. Now, in my opinion, a lot of the Ascension bonuses from the starter rares, they're not really too huge. They might be in the early game. Now, if you are a newer player, you're probably not going to have 100% crit rate, at least not to start off. It's not actually as difficult as you might think it is with all the sources of crit that there are in the game, especially the critical rate set. But as a newer player, you're going to benefit more from this part of the Ascension skill than if you're in the mid or the late game, is because once again, once you get past 100% crit rate, you're really just not going to benefit from having that extra % chance to inflict a critical hit. But either way, it's still a very solid AoE skill with a 3-turn cooldown. You've probably seen it has that really cool animation. I see it in the arena quite a bit. And then the final skill here places a 25% increased attack buff on this champion for 2 turns, places a 30% increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns, if this champion's current HP is less than 50%, so we do have a conditional right there. But in my opinion, the best part about this skill is the very end right there, gains an extra turn. So not only can you use this skill, but this skill isn't going to take up your turn. So you can actually gain all the benefits from this skill, and you can still act again, which is great. A lot of skills in Raid Shadow Legends that have that gains an extra turn at the end of it, that's going to bump up a lot of the skills in the game from being below average, not so great, very medium, to really, really good skills. That makes a huge difference when it comes to things like the arena and even things like your overall performance in the clan boss. So this is a really nice skill. It also has the ability to go down from a 5-turn to a 4-turn cooldown. You've got an attack buff. It's not the strongest attack buff, and as you do move into the mid and late game, you're probably going to get better buffs than this. But for a starter champion, you have a lot of utility on Athel. You have the weaken debuff from the A1, which can go up to 100% chance, and you also have the increased attack self buff and the increased defense self buff as well if you have low HP. Very solid, comes with an AoE as well, triple attack A1. You've got that same aura as well. Athel is a very solid champion, definitely not a champion that you will regret taking to level 60. And finally, of course, we have, in my opinion, what is going to be the best of the 4 starter rares, and that is going to be Kale. Kale is absolutely fantastic. He is great. He is a great champion, and honestly, I would say that Kale is probably one of the best rares in the game overall. There's a few other ones that kind of line up to him, like Cold Heart and Apothecary, but still, he's got to be in the top 5, top 7, has to be in the top 10 for sure. He's fantastic, a really good rare that definitely his power will line up to many epics in the game. In fact, I'd say he's even better than a lot of the epics in Raid Shadow Legends. He's great. So he is in my top 5, or my list of the video that I ended up making a few days ago. 5 champions, 5 rares that you can end up taking to level 60. He is in that list. He's one of the first people that I talk about because he is really, really good. So let's go over his skill 1. Attacks one enemy, has an 80% chance of placing a 2.5% poison debuff for 2 turns. And you can see that this does get boosted, the buff debuff chance. You also get some extra damage with some skill books. It is only a 1 attack, so that's one of the downsides of his skill 1. Unfortunately, it doesn't attack twice or 3 times, but it does come with that added poison, and that is going to come in very handy for the clan boss, because the clan boss, of course, has so much HP that when you do poison debuffs, you end up doing a massive, massive amount of damage with those poison debuffs in comparison to the actual amount of damage that you are doing, because poison debuffs are going to scale based on the overall HP. Very, very good. So definitely not a bad A1. Even if it's not the clan boss, just any other dungeons or any other encounters where you're fighting enemies that have lots of HP, poison is going to come in really handy, and you'll see that when it comes to your damage reports, having poisons is going to increase the overall amount of damage that you inflict in battles by quite a bit. So very solid skill 1. Now this is, in my opinion, probably the skill that makes Kale so unbelievably good, especially for a rare. This skill is amazing. Fantastic skill. One of the best skills on rare champions overall. We have Acid Rain. Attacks all enemies, so it is going to be your AoE. Has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit. I believe that portion comes from the Ascension, just like all the other skills. I already just have my Kale ascended and at level 50 right now, so it's still saying that. So you can count that out if you don't have him ascended. Fills the turn meter of this champion by 25% for each enemy killed. And this is what is going to allow your Kale to be a very, very good campaign farmer. Yes, he's not going to be the most quick in the game. Sure, there are going to be champions that are going to be quicker. But considering he is a starter rare, you get to pick him for free. And he has many other uses that are going to be outside of the campaign. He is a very good campaign farmer. So you don't have to worry about getting those 6, 7, 8 second campaign runs at the start. You're going to have plenty of other goals in the game. Being able to do the brutal campaign in 20, 30, 40 seconds is still going to be fantastic. So, you know, keep that in mind. Just, you don't have to have a perfect campaign farmer to have a good campaign farmer, and this skill is going to be great. So, absolutely fantastic skill. Once again, only downside to this is just like the other starter rares is the Ascension ability, which gives you the extra % chance to inflict a critical hit. Once you're kind of in the mid-late game stages of gearing, you're probably going to already have 100% crit anyway, so you're not going to get quite as much benefit from skills like that. And you have Disintegrate, attacks 4 enemies at random, has a 40% chance of placing a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns. Lots of attacks. This is going to be a great skill for the clan boss because you only actually have 1 enemy that you are attacking, so you're going to get a lot of procs. You have a stronger poison on this. Even though it's only 40%, you can increase it with skill books, and overall a pretty solid skill 3. In my opinion, though, the combination of having a poison on his auto and also a stronger poison on his skill 3, that as well as his very, very solid skill 2 AoE on a 3-turn cooldown, this is what is going to make Kale so good. And he's not just going to be good in the campaign, he's going to be good in the clan boss because you've got those poisons. He's going to be pretty decent in dungeons because, again, poisons going to be good against any kind of encounters where you're fighting things with lots of HP. If you build him right, he hits very hard, he's great at the campaign, he's good at the clan boss, and he's a very versatile champion. He can take on a lot of roles, and for a rare and a starter rare, you get him for free. He's a fantastic champion. So that is going to be my list right there from the best to the worst. We have Kale at number 1, we have Athel at number 2, Elhine at number 3, and Gaelic in 4th place. Now, once again, your list might be a little bit different from mine, and that is totally okay. If you have anything that you disagree with or anything that you want to add or why you might think maybe this champion is a spot above, you guys are welcome to let me know in the comments, but I thought I would go through my list and tell you guys the reasons as to why. So with that all being said, that is actually going to be it for the video today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a quick like as well. A big thank you to all of you guys who are new, and that's it for today. Have a good one, everyone. Until next time, this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.